everybody. Thank you very much, Bianca. Morning, everybody. Everybody got a little bit of a sore head? Did you manage to get out last night? Raise your hands. There we go, a few people over there. Thank you for joining so early in the morning. I appreciate it. I know in the dark auditorium in this wonderful chat that we're going to have, you can have a little sleep, don't worry. Guys, we're talking about DeFi 2.0 today and the shift that we're seeing in the industry beyond DeFi Summer last year. And I'm joined by some amazing people. I want to allow them to come out onto stage and introduce themselves very shortly. Before I do that, though, I wanted to say thank you again for coming down. And I'm Rupert Barksfield. If you've not heard of me before, check out amulet.org. We're a new DeFi insurance protocol. And that's kind of apt for DeFi 2.0 and what we're talking about. So rather than me drone on, I'm going to bring out everybody else and allow them to introduce themselves as they come. So Ankit, can you join me out here? Michael and Don, please come up to the stage. All right, so Ankit, can you tell us a little bit about you and what EasyFi does?
Hi, this is Ankit, and I represent EasyFi. EasyFi was the first layer 2 lending protocol started in 2020. We were the first DeFi company on Polygon, and we have so far had very good success. And now we are heading into the new version of DeFi and working on various different things related to MetaFi and like lending for metaverses. I had a talk yesterday on that and a couple other things.
Okay, pretty broad then. Michael, can you tell us a little bit about Okra?
Absolutely. Good morning, everyone. Michael So, co-founder at Okra Finance. Okra Finance is the permission DeFi composable index platform. So effectively, we combine three things into one. One is the fact that we have the on-chain dApp GUI that allows the fund manager, financial advisors to create a fund on-chain and be able to execute against the liquidity venues. The second part is that we have the infrastructure to support the fact that these liquidity venues can be executed by the investors using the strategies created by the fund manager, financial advisors. And the third part is the fact that we put a permission layer on top of it, such that institutional guys can use the internal guidelines to be readily adopt these DeFi strategies.
Thank you. And finally, Don, you'll notice that Don is not Richard, but he is from QuantStamp, so give us a bit of a rundown.
Hi, everybody. My name is Don Ho. I'm the managing director of QuantStamp. If you have not heard of QuantStamp, QuantStamp is a Y Combinator-backed cybersecurity company. We do audits. We've secured about 90% of DeFi, worked with over 750 projects, and secured over $200 billion of digital asset risk.
So, pretty good then. What I'd like to talk a little bit more about today is, well, what I want to focus on is trying to involve you guys as much as possible. We're only up here as a bit of a boilerplate, but actually the people that are learning are you guys. So if you have a question, please raise your hand as quickly as you can. I will try and see it. If I don't see it, grab somebody for the tech team, and we'll get a mic over to you, and we can get a question up here and riff on that. But before I go too much further into that, I want to kind of set the stage and understand what the hell is DeFi 2.0. I mean, we've got so many buzzwords inside the industry. It feels like another. What is it to you, and why is it matter? I'm going to throw that to you, Ankit, first.
So in my view, DeFi 2.0, like the evolution of any industry, is basically progression from what we existingly have. And like I was discussing, is DeFi 2.0 essentially is going to have progression in two different sides. One is bringing in better out of the existing functionalities of the DeFi 1.0 by bringing in better liquidity efficiency. And in a minute, I'll give an example of what I mean. Second part is the evolution of DeFi on the functional standpoint, where bringing in new functionalities, new innovation in using smart contracts for financial products. So these are the two directions in which I see DeFi 1.0 progressing into DeFi 2.0. And to give an example and context for people to understand it better, when I talk about better efficiency in liquidity, still utilizing the existing functional parameters of DeFi 1.0, with that I mean like today when people deploy their capital and liquidity in Uniswap, that stays idle until it is used for the swap in a particular pool. So having money idle is a loss of interest in that manner, is a loss of yield. So as part of DeFi 2.0, and there are a lot of DEXs which are already working on this model, is that while the liquidity is idle in the pool, a portion of that gets deployed to other yield generating avenues like Aave, Compound, EasyFi, etc., where that capital which was locked in the contracts is earning yield and then is brought back the moment it is required for facilitating the swap. So this is an example where it's an evolution of existing functional nodes with better efficiency. And then the second part of bringing in more functional nodes into the DeFi, the functional capabilities, functional evolution of DeFi, is an example of like MetaFi, the lending for metaverses which don't exist today, which is becoming part of DeFi. Then the second part is more structured products, like we recently had seen there are lending, unsecured lending that has started utilizing the social credibility from teller and issuance of microloans which are unsecuritized, uncollateralized. So that is also a functional evolution. And then on top of that, the structured products like credit default swaps on those loans, those are the structured products that we will see in DeFi 2.0.
So it sounds like a combination of like lots of different things working in tandem together. Don, this is more of a question in your area. Isn't that going to provide a shed load more risk to the users?
I think it can bring in more risk, but I think to Ankit's point, I think it brings in a lot more innovation. When I think about DeFi 2.0, there are the two prongs of, I think, technical innovation, using idle liquidity positions, but I think there's a very large commercial and adoption angle as well. So for example, at QuantStamp, we audit everything under the roof, whether that is GameFi, MetaFi, DeFi, but it's really doing it in a way that builds a standard of security and building a standard of development. By doing these standards where it is known security principles, known smart contracts that are reused, thinking about composability, while it brings in faster paces of innovation, it should also increase the security because of it. And so it's a two-pronged approach for everyone listening out here, which is, from a user perspective, how do you increase your security posture and also have a better sense of due diligence for protocols who have good security posture? But it's also then taking a look at what DeFi 2.0 can bring and how much quicker we can use some of these protocols. Whereas we're not waiting for it to reach 10 million in TVL, 100 million, but maybe using it on a day one launch for asset managers as an example.
So that's a good lead in. Like on the institutional side of things, are you seeing that? Do they see it as a shift? Do they see it as something different? Do they just want to actually gain access to DeFi in general? Is it helping you as a business?
Sure. So to go back to what DeFi is, such that we can have a baseline to define perhaps what DeFi 2.0 may be. DeFi 1.0 have three prongs, two of which can easily transition into 2.0. The three prongs include the following. There is the location of value of transfer, where previously in TradFi, value of transfer happens in a centralized location, thereby having exposure to counterparty risk, for anyone using such locations. The second part is the fact that DeFi is non-custodial, and for also that reason, counterparty risk, settlement risk is significantly reduced using DeFi. The third prong is the fact that most DeFi aim to become a DAO structure, where the decision of making within internally of a project can be a little bit more democratic. The institutional side really like the fact that the settlement risk and the counterparty risk can be reduced, perhaps sometimes eliminated, due to the fact that this value transfer is completely transparent, and also on the fact that some of the Zap style transaction technology used in DeFi can be applicable to a multi-steps transactions that are often seen in portfolio creations. So when we talk to the institutional guys such as the regulated broker-dealers, the financial advisors, investment advisors, RIAs as we call them, they oftentimes find that they can use DeFi to quickly deploy their own strategies and differentiate the market in a way that TradFi would not allow them to do so. Meaning the paperwork that is involved, the legal risk that's involved, the counterparty risk that we talked about, now completely change in a way such that they're able to utilize this technology to advance the businesses that cannot be previously done. So in our view, in addition to what Ankit, you were saying, from a functional advanced perspective, from a standardization of the risk assessment perspective, from an adoption perspective, we see that there's a lot of money sitting on the sideline, waiting to tap into simply the technology functionality that allows them to do more things than they can today. So I guess combining all three together, if the 2.0 is defined by the actual TVL, if you will, then we can perhaps see that we're already on the path towards that, and we're probably trying to define exactly in hindsight, let's say 5 years down the road, what we have done to get to that point.
So it sounds like that we are talking a lot about the functionality and the broader macro view of what DeFi 2.0 is. And I really want to kind of dig down into the micro view and what does this actually mean for the user? Because ultimately, I think, we've been talking about it for what, 4 or 5 years now. Adoption is always going to be the Achilles heel. And so is DeFi 2.0 going to be a better experience? Are we actually... Should we be spending a huge amount more focus on UX, UI, rather than just pure functionality? Ankit?
Yes, absolutely. There are so many new platforms that have come, which are helping users. We'll come to you in a minute. So there are so many new platforms that have come in and are helping people who are not traditionally crypto native users to still be able to participate in yield generation opportunities, which allow you to deploy your capital through your bank debit cards, credit cards directly. So bringing in more seamless integrations with on-ramps and login options using email, so that people do not really have already existing the wallet creation mechanism. So those are the things that are evolving industry-wide for the better user adoption into Web3. So that is not local to DeFi, but yes, that is also going to impact the mass user onboarding into DeFi by enabling them to easily using their email address and using their social logins to be able to start using apps, and also be able to participate into DeFi using their debit cards, credit cards, and also a very important side in DeFi 2.0, which was already started at the time of 1.0 but could not really get the enormous adoption, is basically on-chain KYC. So the way I see that most of the protocols are going to get chip into these on-chain KYCs, where the problem with centralized systems and why we in the first place started to talk about DeFi was the sense of ownership, not the anonymity. So anonymity is not something that's such a compelling thing that people look for in majority of case, but the more important thing is the ownership of my money, the ownership of my assets. So that particular case can still be achieved while still having the KYC, so that you can keep bad actors at the way. So these are the things that I think are happening already on the UX side, on the mass adoption side, in addition to the functional advancement that we speak, which are going to become a natural integral part of DeFi 2.0.
A huge shot across the regulation bow just there, which we'll get to. But I really wanted to get to your question. Is there a microphone we can get down to this gentleman down here? Just, shout and I'll reiterate.
My name is Michael, and I do a lot of work with Layer 1 blockchains that I was introduced to Web3 through DeFi. And something that piqued my interest was the interoperability between the different protocols on DeFi networks. So my question Chronos or Avalanche, whatever that is, what does that interoperability look like now, and what does it look like in the future?
Okay, I would like to take that answer because,
Just reiterate it for the live stream.
okay, you mean the question?
Yeah,
Okay,
well, let me
so
ask.
you can repeat the question.
So the question is interoperability across chain in DeFi 2.0. Go.
So that's a very good point you raised, and that's also an important factor that is coming in as part of DeFi 2.0, and there are already many projects who have launched cross-chain messaging systems, which are being now used by and being implemented by, as we speak, by different protocols, where essentially you are, let's say, for example, putting in one particular asset on Binance Smart Chain, which you have, and you want to take a loan in another asset, which is on, let's say, Polygon. So ideally, you as a user should not be worried about that where on which chain this asset exists. I own this asset in my address, which is common across the chains. So ideally, I should be able to put this as a collateral and take another asset which I want as a loan. So this is how the DeFi 2.0 looks like. Instead of you manually today using a bridge, transferring an asset to Binance Smart Chain to Polygon, and then from there taking a loan and then moving it to Avalanche. Instead of that, the universal layer, which is getting built using a lot of these messaging protocols that are built, like Chainlink launched one, there is something called Router Protocol, and a couple other cross-chain messaging systems which are now coming in, which are going to be enabling this kind of smooth cross-chain interoperable user experience.
So it's a really good point, because when I look at DeFi now, and especially like looking at what we're building for our own protocol, like a multi-chain future seems inevitable, but it's a mess right now. It's a total mess. How do you go about explaining that in a institutional facing way, Michael?
Yeah. When we spoke with the institutions, a lot of times today they still live and breathe on Ethereum. That's probably the maximum extent they can go about looking into DeFi today. We also have looked into and also trying to advance, the causes for the DeFi adoption from an institutional base on Avalanche, and perhaps also on BNB, which are significantly and completely different ecosystems. The way we see things is that from an institutional side, they look at values. They look at the downside risk protection. They look at a lot of things, that obviously have to do with the regulatory side of the equation. And at the end of the day, today, they are quite unable to go into a more advanced stage of cross-chain wormholes, bridging, because at the end of the day, all these solutions provide some sort of wrapping, some sort of counterparty risk, exposure, if you will, to all the guys looking at the risk side of the equation. And for that reason, they will be able to partake in such bridging exercises, but they need to get the assurance of the fact that, oh, am I protected should one of the protocols are unable to perform such protection for me. So a lot of times it actually goes back to almost like a corporate bond portfolio, right? They will look at the portfolio, they see that they may be correlated, but they will still want to buy an insurance in the form of a CDS. So oftentimes, what we found, on our platform is that there are many liquidity venues that can be tapped into, but at the end of the day, they want to be financially protected from a policy perspective, and that's where insurance comes in. Actually, interestingly.
Thanks for the nice plug. Don, when you're looking at this, like, there feels like there's another chain every other week, right? And somebody's building a new layer 0, and somebody's building a new layer 1, 2, whatever you want to call it. It must be extremely complicated from an auditing point of view, especially when there are new languages, implemented, albeit based off, much older ones. How do you assess? How do you go about assessing the risks involved with these brand new chains, and then like trying to interoperability assess them between different chains?
Yeah, it's really difficult because largely there are new paradigms. So to go back to the question first and foremost, how do we deal with an interoperable future? I think it looks a lot like games or social media networks we use today. Put another way, when we access Facebook or Instagram, do we know what database technologies are being used? No, we just want pictures of our cats and all of our food. And I think that in DeFi 2.0, 3.0, whatever it is, that is going to be very similar, where I don't know what chain I'm using, but I know what protocol or application I'm using. And on the back end, it's just routing altogether. Now, to your point, that presents a lot of new challenges in this interoperable future. I think the most immediate one will be bridges, right? I think the nuance of how to connect different blockchains via bridges or not bridges is so new that we don't fully know how to look at that end state of DeFi for Facebook just yet. What we can't control, though, again, are standards around what smart contracts are being used, what are the most battle-tested languages, and from a user perspective, how many audit reports are there, right? And how many of them are actually interoperable with one another and are looking at multiple vectors of risk between, a Solana to Ether, Polygon to Ether, or anything else. And I think once we create these standards, we will bring in more FANG-like engineers who have better security posture. And by bringing more FANG-type engineers, that means we will harden some of these messaging systems, and that over time, it'll just work as if it was a Facebook or an Instagram.
So it sounds a little bit like the regulation question, which we obviously touched on at the end before we went to the question from the audience. But my concern around that is really, how do we do KYC? How do we do regulation in the right way? If we want to be compliant and we want mass adoption, it's going to have to happen, right? But where is the line drawn? Can you still have anonymity and operate with DeFi, the future of DeFi, so DeFi 2.0 for the sake of the word?
As I said, in my view, anonymity and regulation do not go hand in hand. So the regulators do want to know, they want to manage so that you can control the fraudulent fraudulent activities, money laundering, terrorist financing, those kind of things. They are required to be kept at bay. And when you talk about anonymity, immediately you make gateway for these kind of things. So I think, like I mentioned, and I'm a strong believer of this, that if the regulations, and which definitely it will, have to come in while still preserving the decentralization and enabling decentralization, there will have to be hybrid models where the KYC exists, where the user, the address that is doing the transaction is known, is stored, but not being given as an address, as an information to every other protocol to know, but then if it is required, the information can be drawn out with the permission of the user being forced on that.
Will regulation kill the innovation, though? Is it going to kill the APYs? Is it going to? Are we going to be handcuffed by this, Michael?
We see it differently, slightly. We see that DeFi, at the end of the day, right, allows the finality of, like I said before, the confirmation, the settlement, the value of transfer to happen on-chain, and thereby eliminating some of the central counterparty risk. The KYC portion obviously is required, by law first and foremost. But at the same time, what we have seen, at least, on the conversations that we have had with clients, is that they would like the identity to be kept off-chain, which is kind of, alluding to the fact that privacy is still being preserved. But not to forget the fact that, these are regulated entities who have licenses, papers, and policies to stick with. We, on our side, are already designing a process that allows, these off-chain transfer of information to be executable between just two counterparties without, losing the fact that, the privacy is preserved and not be shown on-chain. But in our opinion, we are all advancing towards a mass adoption. And for that reason, innovation, meaning like the advancements on functionalities and using DeFi, the more efficient, liquidity provisioning, all can be utilized using DeFi and still stick to this, the regime, that are currently in place.
Yeah, I think it's sort of a false choice. I don't think it needs to be binary. A really good example is the email protocol. All of us today can set up our own email server. We don't need a KYC for it, but we really like the ease and use of Google, Gmail, Yahoo, and as a result, we KYC, right? And so I do think tides will lift all boats, where we're always going to have this permissionless world where we can go with our own pseudonymity and use our MetaMask. But there's also going to be another part of ourselves that maybe use more hosted and centralized services that tap into DeFi. Both are great, and I think having the option for users make DeFi so cool.
We've only got a few more minutes here, so if you've got a burning question, don't hold back, please. Oh, there's one over here. I'm not sure if there is mics in the audience, so please stand up and shout.
So governments today are in a condition of overreach that we've never seen before in the history of our republic. Freezing and appropriating funds of citizens that are not aligned with their whatever regime they particularly have, whoever's voted in. DeFi and Web 3.0 are looked at as a mechanism so we can keep our funds without the government freezing them. And you guys are saying you really want to be compliant with government, and they're using that as a technology to say, hey, I want to be able to protect everybody else from fraud, but really what they're doing is getting your information so they can at some point in the future appropriate that or freeze it. But you guys are the mechanism for stopping that from happening, and what I'm hearing is you're not going to stop it from happening. So can you help me understand that a little bit better?
Okay, so it's a good question. I'll reiterate it for the live stream. It's about the government overreach, and we're here talking about regulation and how it's coming and it's going to impact our businesses. But actually, the promise of Web3 and DeFi is the fact that you don't have that control by governments, and that's a huge issue around the world that people are facing. And I get your point. We're kind of here saying, well, we're going to have to regulate in order to survive. Is there a fine line that we can walk? Is there a way of being? I mean, we heard your view in terms of KYC and anonymity. Michael, can you still look after your own money in the future of DeFi, or is there always going to be a subset that's going to be private and secret?
The way we see it is both worlds will continue to exist in parallel, meaning the pools of money, the sources of money, who choose to partake in whichever way, whether it is the completely KYC regulated side or maybe the non-regulated side, there will be people who, basically, join these two particular ecosystem, if you will. And the way we see it is that, especially for institutions, institutions are oftentimes defined by what? The parties that are managing other people's money. Now, the key part is that if you allow someone else to manage your money, clearly you have already given away some of that, freedom, if you will, right? But if you choose to directly interact with the value of transfer, as I said before, right, which is on-chain, finality completely defined, you're still able to do so. So that's why I said, I think the two worlds will continue to exist. Those who want to keep the license, if you will, those who want to basically manage other people's money and be able to basically show the fact that, yes, you have some sort of protections against, for example, let's say a protocol not being able to perform as they should, then the regulator side will kick in. But otherwise, those who are more, a little bit more, more willing to try new technology, will try the ways that are more innovative and at the same time not be as bound and handcuffs in other ways.
Yeah, Don, is there a viewpoint from the auditor standpoint in terms of those networks and protocols that are more secret and more private, and what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think DeFi is unstoppable. I think code on the blockchain is really unstoppable. From a security perspective, what that means is smart contract auditing plays an even more important role now, because when you don't know your counterparty, all you have is code on the blockchain. Well, that can be verified. That can be audited specifically for non-custodial type transactions. So in places where there is not government oversight and where things are really unstoppable, I think smart contract audits become sort of a new arbiter that allow people to know that they can trust some software that is safe, that the code does what's intended to do without overreach. However, again, the world is not binary and we don't have to choose one or the other. We can probably do both. And for certain pockets of money that you want to be yours, that's non-seizable, go the full unstoppable DeFi route. But for things like Okra or Easy, where you want to actually earn higher yield than you can achieve yourself, you can portion another part of your allocation into those things too. I think this blended future we will continue to see, it will continue to evolve, but it will be both regulated and also unregulated.
And I think, Don, you've had the final word on the subject and what DeFi 2.0 is. I hope you've enjoyed the time this morning listening to what we've got to yabber on about. Thank you to all of my guests. Thank you for coming out this morning and listening. If you want to review it again, it's back online on YouTube. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Rupert.
Thank you very much.
everyone.